What's up, guys? We are back. We are back for another episode. Got Robert Pardon on. He's got almost 40 years of sobriety. Thanks for checking it out. Make sure you leave a comment, guys. I want to know how you're doing, how long you've been sober. Enjoy the episode. Let's go. All right, we back. The Sober Fix podcast. We've got Robert on. Robert's the man. He always agrees to come on here, rain or shine, no matter what. He's here. He's on time. He's ready to spread hope and inspiration and a bunch of experience, years of sobriety and living free. If you're just finding this channel, this podcast, I appreciate it, man. We do a bunch of stuff related to recovery, 12-step recovery, alcoholism, addiction, all from drugs to gambling. Sometimes we do the porn and sex stuff. We do a bunch of different stuff, a bunch of different guests. Robert, what's happening, man? What is new with you? I know I had you on here recently, but I know Florida's treating you pretty good. Is that right?
You know, Laura and I are going to go out to the beach tonight just to watch the sunset and throw some chairs out there. And man, I tell you, the greatest thing I've ever done. You know, Drew, you talk about, by the way, you look fantastic as usual. I think you get younger as we move forward in this journey. But you're happy, joyous, and free. And I think that's where your light shines brighter, so you look younger, right? And that's the miracle of recovering, what we're going to talk about tonight. I love Florida. Florida was fantastic. Laura and I look at it. Laura's my wife. We've been together over almost 37 years, and coming from a person who had two failed marriages, being married over 36 years is quite an accomplishment to number three. And matter of fact, she says I can't divorce her, but I can certainly burn at night. So I love living here. I love the freedom. I love the sunsets. I love the sunrise. It's a totally different thing from living in Salt Lake City, where we had the expansiveness of the mountains and the beauty there. There's nothing like looking at the ocean and just being free. You know, it reminds me, and this is a rabbit trail, a friend of mine back in the mid 80s when I lived in Southern California. His name was Jim. He said, "I'm Jim and I'm a lucky alcoholic." He said, "The tide goes in and the tide goes out and I don't get drunk in between." And I thought, wow, what a cool way to look at things. And you know, it hit me a few years ago when we were vacationing in Daytona Beach and I was overlooking the ocean from my hotel room, and I was watching the tide go in and I was watching the tide go out. And there's not a human or power on this earth that can stop the tide. And tide comes in, the tide goes out in a 24-hour window. It reaches high tide and reaches low tide. And I thought, wow, what a great way. And you know, 35 years later, whatever it was, it finally clicked what Jim was talking about. And just the miracle of nature, what we get to be involved with, and how our eyes and our spirit open up to a new way of thinking, not only a new way of living. And I'm not sure if the living encourages the thinking or the thinking encourages the living. I don't care, because both are affected. It's just a great way of looking at things, the expansiveness of my creator, God as I understood him, and just all the things that higher power, God as I understand God, allows us to appreciate. Like you're a soccer coach. You get out and you do things. You love nature. Do you find the same thing true for you?
I do. And I love the concept of the tides. And when you mention and staying sober in between, finding a way to stay sober in between, it's just good stuff, man. And I love what you were talking about too before we started. You were talking about kind of just which goes along with this, the miracles that we see, where you see someone who you think, man, there's no way that guy's ever going to get sober. And that's what I used to say about myself. But I had other friends I used to say that about. And then slowly but surely, you see these people come in, they come into recovery and they find a sponsor, a mentor, and all of a sudden you just see them change. And we were talking about your friend who's 30 something days. it doesn't take too long to see the change. It's
Yeah.
crazy, man. The miracle that we see over and over.
Yeah, going back to my friend, I met him when he was about 2 days sober. And then we've communicated via text and messaging and try to mentor him along the way. And then I saw him at 36 days at a speaker meeting. And the guy, his hair was done. He had a smile. He was still scared. I mean, sometimes I still get scared after 39 years. And I'm sure you do as well. Sometimes things just get overwhelming. But the guy looked fresh. The guy looked like he could do this. It's like, we have this giant ship, and the ship can't go if the wind's not blowing. So we sit there and the sails are down, and we're just sitting in the water, waiting for nature to come and take us, waiting for that higher power, that gust of wind to blow us into the direction that we want to go in. And that's what recovery does. It fills our sails where, you know, the first indication of hope. We were of the hopeless variety. Remember when you were hopeless? Remember you would swear off at 11 o'clock at night, and by 7 o'clock the next morning, when you woke up from being passed out, you were, where can I get my next drink? Where can I get my next drug? Where can I get my fix? Because we knew we couldn't make it throughout the day without getting high, without getting drunk, without sabotaging our own life. And today, it's so different. We look at life differently because there's a different wind that's blowing us.
Yeah. That's a great way to put it. And I remember those days thinking, man, I'm done with this. That's it. I had a bad night, or I had some legal stuff, or I was arguing with someone, or I just felt terrible physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, just the whole gamut of stuff. And I remember just saying, that's it. I'm done. I can't tell you how many times my parents would be talking to me and they'd be kind of talking some sense into me. I would swear, I mean, I would pass a lie detector test at
Yeah,
that moment saying, I'm done. This is causing me so much pain and suffering. I don't even know how to describe it. I can't do this anymore. And exactly like you said, I would come to the next morning and I had this feeling every time I woke up, it was just like doomsday. Like, oh my gosh, I have to go do something I don't want to do, but I don't know any other way to not do it. That's exactly how I felt. So I can relate to that, Robert.
yeah, and I think every person, and this is what's so important, Drew. When we go into the rooms of recovery, I don't want to hear how you lost a relationship. I know how to do that. I don't want
Right.
to hear about you losing a job. I know how to do that. I don't want to hear about your parents not trusting you, your siblings can't can't wait for you to leave, your significant other, your spouse tells you to leave and they change the keys. The judge is looking for you, the law enforcement, all those things that happen. Um, and then we get sober, and our life begins to turn around, like a and it doesn't turn around overnight. Even though we stop drinking or using overnight, sometimes the change, like going back to the analogy of a ship, the larger the ship, and we're quite large, um, the longer it takes to turn it around, or depending upon the body of water you're in. But eventually, if course correction is right, if you turn so quickly, you stand a chance of tipping. But if you gradually turn, we get sober overnight, we recover over time. And that's one that's so important for a newcomer to remember. Just don't drink, just don't use, just keep coming back. And little by little by little, the fellowship that we enjoy, it says in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, God will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. So as we surrender and we become willing to turn our will and our life over to the care of God, as the first 100, we understood him being all loving, all caring, all powerful. We begin to see our life begin to change. And just like my friend, I could just see a glimmer in him. I went up to him after the meeting and said, "You're not the same guy. You've been given some hope." And man, when we go from dope to hope, we become a machine. You know, I'm fully confident, Drew, that I will die sober. I'm not a middle of the road guy. Now that doesn't mean I'm guaranteed in life I can slack off, because Sir Isaac Newton says things that stay in motion tend to stay in motion. Things that rest tend to stay at rest. He also talked about the theory of gravity that he handed off to Einstein, and Einstein took it from there. Gravity states that if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward. So every day we're making an incremental change. Some days we take 3 steps forward. Other days we may take 1 step back, but we're always in a forward position, trying new things, trying to reinvent ourselves. You know, you were talking earlier before we were recording about how things changed in your life. Things were moved out of the way and you overcame certain things to continue to become who you're becoming now.
Yeah, and I'll kind of piggyback off that as well. And this is what was so interesting. I was told after getting all these, and I talked about this a little bit with you before we started, but just to anyone listening, in my addiction, I had different felonies. I had different misdemeanors. It was all related to possessions and everything that comes along most of the time or a lot of times with drug addiction and alcoholism. I remember being told by many people, probation officers, the court. I remember calling different numbers, and they literally told me, you will never be able to get rid of all that stuff, at
Yeah.
least not for 10 years. That's what was told to me. And they said, by then, you better have such an amazing resume. It's not even funny. And I remember just giving up and thinking, oh, that's never going to happen. It just is what it is. I'm going to have to take different jobs that I can get by this and that. And then fast forward, all of a sudden I'm linked up in recovery. I'm working a 12-step program. I have a sponsor. I've started to work steps. Things are starting to change. I had the fellowship around me that you talked about, Robert. I had hope. I had that motivation, that wind
Yeah.
in the sail, like you mentioned. And slowly but surely, these things just started to happen, things that I couldn't even explain.
Yeah.
Because next thing you know, I got caught on this day. I happened to be praying to God that I could just somehow get sober, and bam, my prayers were answered. I was arrested that day. I had 5 years over my head. I ended up in drug court, ended up getting one of the best judges in the world. I mean, this guy was so pro recovery and change and second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh chances. And he basically said, look, here's the deal. You graduated drug court, so we got rid of some charges. But now if you come back and you're still sober after a year, come back and talk to me, and then we can work on the rest. And I thought, yeah, right. This guy is just saying that. He's just blowing smoke at us. Sure enough, I found out it was about a year later, and I found out that he was about to retire. And I knew I was never going to have this opportunity with any other judge, because this is the guy that I was in drug court with for like 4 years. And I went, and all of a sudden the impossible became possible. I don't know how it happened. There were so many people that told me it wouldn't happen, but it just goes to show what you were talking about, Robert, that we just start changing a little bit at a time, and
Yeah.
all of a sudden things that you never thought could happen start to happen,
Yeah, you know what? And I'm so glad you framed it that way. And congratulations on your reinventing and all the things that you enjoy doing, you now can do legally. Um, it says in the promises, it says that God will do for you what we could not do for ourselves. And in that moment, God was doing for you. He said, and we get a front row seat to it. We get a front row seat to the miracles. It doesn't matter. I told it doesn't matter how, it matters what. It doesn't matter who your higher power is, it's what your higher power does. And we're caught up in this miracle. But everything starts from being clean and sober one day at a time. And we discussed this before, and we might have discussed it on the previous podcast, where we were on tradition 3. And tradition 3 in Alcoholics Anonymous is the only requirement for membership is the desire to stop drinking. Well, that's fine and dandy. That's the requirement for membership. Now, I remember getting clean and sober in Las Vegas back in 1986, where we had a meeting called the Midnight Messengers, right? And 7 days a week, midnight, boom, rooms were opened up. They were always open. This club was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week technically for guys like me who had nowhere to go, no job. All we could do is act like a greeter, at the front door, welcoming people at 3 in the morning, and everywhere else would kick me out. And so I saw a lot of people who had an honest desire to stop drinking and stop using, but they didn't stop drinking. They didn't stop using. They would roll in from the casino, high as can be, drunk as can be. And at the end of the meeting, they'd roll out. They were hoping that some magic, but it says, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. And if we're not ready to take certain steps, we're just not ready. I tell people all the time, you have better admitted you're powerless over alcohol or drugs before I ever meet you. Because if you haven't admitted your powerlessness already, what am I going to do for you? How am I going to help you? I can't help you, because it says we have to admit to our innermost self. That has nothing to do with me. Has nothing to do with you. It has to do with that person who is sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. But just because you have a desire to stop drinking doesn't mean you're sober. And just because you're sober doesn't mean you're recovered. That's why Bill Wilson said, co-founder of AA, said, we feel a man unthinking when he says sobriety is enough. So there's got to be more for people like you and me and Whitney and others. We have to have the desire. We have to stop drinking. And then we have to, according to my understanding, and this may be different for different people, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous are the only thing that worked for me. And that's all I can account to. I have to have a desire to recover. I have to submit myself to the program. As long as I think I have an easier way, I'm going to take the easier route. Who doesn't want to? I mean, it's human nature to take the easier, softer way. I don't want to have to admit I'm a liar, I'm a cheat, I'm a thief, I can't be trusted. But if I don't admit those things, where am I?
Yeah, I wanted basically the 12-step meetings to tell me to go home and kind of wean off of alcohol
Yeah,
or something, just I was always looking for an escape route. And I see this a lot too, like you mentioned, where with the step one, it's just at least for me, if I thought there was any way that I could solve this stuff on my own, I was going to try it. And
yeah.
I did for so many years.
And how many
And
times relapse?
oh my gosh, it was, I used to call myself like a constant relapser, but as I look back now after kind of getting a little bit more experience, I realized that I was never really in recovery before, like
Yeah,
I used to say, oh, I'm relapsing all the time, but I didn't have a fellowship. I hadn't worked any steps. I wasn't in recovery yet. I was just kind of showing up to places here and there. So I realize now I did later on have a couple relapses, but I think you're completely right. It totally aligns with my experience of, and I see a lot of people suffering that were just like me that think they can do it on their own. And it's
yeah,
sad to see because I've seen so many people, especially when I was in drug court, I saw so many, we lost, I believe it was 4 or 5 people out of a 10-person class, men's group during COVID, and a lot of it was just thinking, hey, I think I have one more shot at trying to make drinking or using work. And that's the part that sucks is we see so many people that don't make it back.
yeah. You know what? And I'll tell you, that's a scary notion. Um, because if you're in the rooms as long as you and I have been in the rooms and others like us, we never see people again. One day they're in the rooms and they're in a meeting and raising their hand, I'm recovered, I'm this, I'm that, and we never see them again. And it's not because they move. It's just
Yeah.
they've relapsed and they've never come back from the relapse. And that's a scary notion. That was one of the things because you talk about honesty and all in step one. Um, you know, the how, the HOW, honesty in step one, open mindedness in step two, and willingness in step three. Uh, I was sober 71 days, and I got originally sober February 9th. On April 19th, I realized that I needed to be honest. If I wasn't honest to myself and to you, I was beginning to be honest to myself. I knew my condition, but I couldn't tell you the things I did and the places that I went, because in my mind, you would reject me. You would say, we didn't know you were this sick. you have to
Yeah.
you have to go get some real help, and then we'll be able to assist you. So I hit that stumbling block. I I didn't trust when you said we'll love you until you can learn how to love yourself. And that was my catalyst for going back out, because I knew I'd hit the crossroads of being honest or leaving. And I couldn't be honest, because to get rejected by one more person would have been the end of me. So I rejected myself. And the thing was, Drew, that in 6 short days, I ended up worse off than I ever was before. Remember that? Remember that last time you used? I had a magical moment. My God, how did I get here so quickly? And that scared me back into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, April 25th, 1986. And I've been clean and sober and happy, joyous, and free ever since. And some of the days haven't been as spectacular as other days, but every day moved me toward that magic mark of being sober one day at a time for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I had the same similar experience when I finally was in recovery and I relapsed this last time. I had 10 months. I could not believe how fast
Yeah.
I was right back to doing the same thing. Even so, it was the amounts that I was drinking and using, but I'll tell you what else it was too. It was like this crazy depression, insane suicidal thoughts, I was happy in those 10 months, but I still had some more work to do. But I was shocked at how bad I felt so quickly and how defeated I
Yeah.
felt so quickly. And it
Yeah.
was scary, man. They say sometimes fear can be a good motivator. And that for me was, because that's when I finally realized a lot of the things that I had heard people saying when they said, look, I've relapsed before. And believe me, I had 2 years, 3 years. And within a couple months, I had ruined it all again. I thought,
Yeah.
I don't know about that. Yeah. And sure enough, the second
Yeah.
I felt that relapse, I realized, oh, this is possible. I know
You
exactly
know,
what they're talking.
you bring up something really interesting, because in my 71 days of sobriety, I had been to meetings. I was unemployable in Vegas, and so I would go to 4 or 5 meetings every day because I had nowhere else to go, and it was free coffee. I could bum a cigarette or two, and they had a club in the front and meetings in the back, and I sat in my hotel room that particular night on April 24th, and I thought, these people love me. These people, and I had a taste of what it could be like. And without that taste of what it could be like, I saw people with jobs, with relationships, with the law wasn't looking for them. And I thought, here I am, here they are. No matter what I do, I'm going to go back and say, I want to be like you. Because I didn't want to be like me, and I really didn't want to die. I just felt so hopeless at the time, and I'm so grateful for the program of recovery, because it allowed me to come back and get honest with myself, but with others, so I could really raise my hand and say, you know what, I'm like you. I'm no different. I'm afraid. I'm alone. I'm scared. If I go out and use, I'm going to die, and I don't want to die.
Yeah. And do you think there must be a lot of people that experience that same thing. They come in and they really want to change. They really want to get involved, but maybe they they feel like they've just done too much, or they feel like
Yeah.
they're, do you think that's a lot of people are dealing with that?
I think so, but that's where the fellowship, you talked about that earlier. The fellowship of the program on page 17 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about the fellowship. It says that we are passengers of a great liner when moment after rescue from shipwreck, when camaraderie, joyousness, and democracy pervade the vessel from steerage to captain's table. So the ship goes down, and the unity and the conformity and the friendship that the two men who are drowning gather, because we're all drowning. If we don't save each other, if we don't make a path, we're gone. And so it says, unlike the feeling of the ship's passengers, however, our joy in escape from disaster does not subside as we go our own individual way. The feeling of having shared in a common peril. See, you and I, we've met once, but we're brothers for life because we understand what it's like to die. We also understand what it's like to live. And I know living is much easier with you than dying is without you.
Yeah, that's a great part too in the book, and it always had me thinking because, and I remember looking up steerage, and that's like the lowest deck, the
Yeah.
very bottom, and then it says from steerage to captain's table. So it's basically saying, look, your race, class, your socioeconomic
No,
status, none of that matters at this
no.
point. You are people that were drowning and the ship was going down, and you found a way out, and you're so joyous because you guys have escaped that peril.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. It gets you thinking. I remember, and I breezed by that when I first read it. And there's things now that I find as time goes on, or things that I used to hear people say, people that have been sober as long as you have, and I'd be sitting there in early sobriety, and people would say things that just blew my mind. I couldn't even comprehend them at the time. I was like, that sounds really good. I don't even know what it means yet. And it's funny how years later, certain things that people have said will kind of pop in my head, and I go, oh, that's what he was talking about with that. So it's cool stuff, man.
It really is. And like any good book, the the it never gets old. When I first came into recovery, they told me what to read. And to this day, Drew, 39 years, 14,329 days, or whatever the crazy number is I've been sober, I still read my big book. I still listen to the big book on everything AA. I still listen to Joe and Charlie. I'm a regular listener to Father Martin on YouTube. And I just keep expanding my knowledge and my understanding, because what I read when I was 4 years sober is I can read the same thing at 30 years sober, at 39 years sober, and I find different things. I have more wisdom. I have more understanding of how this thing really works. And not only that, Drew, young men and women like you look to a person like me and say, okay, you've been sober 39 years. How did you get there? What have you done? And I will tell you, I'm not doing anything that you're not doing. You know, if you ask me how I do it, I read my big book. You're supposed to, right? Your basic text, whatever you use. You go to meetings. I go to meetings. I have a sponsor. I have a sponsor. 45 years sobriety. You have a sponsor. And you work with others. And most importantly, you're developing your trust and your relationship with your higher power. And these are all things that I'm doing. So I can tell you what they told me. Here's what you need to do. You need to go to meetings, you need to have a higher power, you need to get a sponsor, you need to work with others, and you need to read the big book or basic text, whatever it is. So we're not doing anything different. We're doing the exact same thing. I've just been doing it a hell of a lot longer than you, but
Yeah,
but you've been doing it longer than the newcomer who just
right.
says, "What do I do?" And you say, "Well, here's what I've done. Do that." And that's where the fellowship really comes into play, because what I think, Drew, is we we stay in the fellowship long enough that the roots of recovery It says, but that in itself could have not held us together as we, you and me, are now joined. And that's where recovery comes in. That in itself, our getting along is not enough. We have to, because eventually the fellowship will become old. And if we're too much recovery, the recovery will become boring. But when you mix fellowship like you and I have, and the plan of recovery, like we both live in day in and day out, it's a formula that is indestructible. And I am indestructible when it comes to those types of things. I'm not impervious to life, but I'm indestructible when it comes to my sobriety.
Yeah. And you know what's so big too, as you talk about kind of the combination of the two, the thing that I love is it doesn't matter what your insurance is. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It
Yeah.
doesn't matter everything that you've been. And this is what I loved about the 12-step stuff is these people gave me an answer, not only an answer or a solution, but they gave me an outline and they told me exactly how to do it. And it required on my part me showing up and being
Yeah.
somewhat open-minded. You know, it was like they basically gave me a plan of action when really no other place could. And it was it's crazy, man. And it's I'm so shocked. You could have someone who is literally on the brink of death, or even if they're not on the brink of death, is just in ruin mentally and just
Yeah.
feels absolutely no hope at all and has nowhere else they can go, not invited anywhere else, no friends. They've lost the spouse, they've lost all their money, they've exhausted every possible rehab or detox or any money they had saved, and they can go into the rooms, man, and it's shocking about how much of a change that they can make.
Yeah.
And that's kind of something that I absolutely loved about it was it doesn't matter where you're at in life, you have a place to go. You have these people will welcome you when no one else will, if that makes
It,
sense.
it does. Bob Darrell talks about where you're going to go and tell people how you burned your life to the ground and clap and say, keep coming back.
Yeah.
That's what we do. We burn our life to the ground over and over and over again. And it's amazing that we can be resuscitated at all to burn it down again. But eventually, we either have to get this or this gets us. Um, Alcoholism, drug addiction is one of the only diseases known to man. I love when Father Martin says it and others say it, that will tell you you don't have it. And denial kills more alcoholics and drug addicts than the drug itself, because you and I have done a lot of drugs, have done a lot of alcohol, but we've recovered and we don't do it anymore. But if we continue to do that, we eventually, drugs and alcohol would be the death of us.
Yeah.
Remember that feeling? I remember standing in front of the mirror on February 9th, 1986, and I looked at myself in the mirror and I realized, not I thought, I realized I was going to die and there was nothing I could do about it. Remember feeling that hopeless, and look at you today. You go anywhere, you do anything, you're people who once asked you to leave now ask you to come back. I mean, it's crazy.
It is crazy. It's a very strange thing when I remember around a year or two and funny stuff started to happen. People that used to lecture me about my drinking started calling me and asking me about the things I was doing to not drink.
Yeah.
And places that typically would have fired me were starting to hire me. Just weird, bizarre stuff.
Yeah.
I remember getting calls from people that used to lecture me on life, and all of a sudden they're calling me and they're asking me, "Oh, how'd you do this and how'd you do that?" Or, how do you maintain kind of your peace of mind? I'm thinking, is this real? Is this person really calling me? Because I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe just how different life started to really look. Robert, I want to get into this. Me and Robert could talk forever if you guys can't tell.
Give me just a second. I need to power up because I'll run out of juice. Hold on
Oh
just.
yeah. Go ahead.
If I don't grab some power, I will be powerless, and you don't want to
Gotta
have
plug in.
me be powerless.
No, no, no.
There we go. I
You're
think
good?
I think so. I think so. I think we got it. There we are. We're rocking.
Perfect.
I have.
Bam, we're
I,
back.
hey, who doesn't like a little bit of power, right?
Hey, we need it.
Got to
We
be
got to know
plugged,
when to plug. Yeah.
be plugged into the source.
Hey, we got to know when to plug in.
That's it. That's
So
it.
this is funny. I went on an AI thing and I said generate 15 questions related to recovery. I said make 5 of them about 12-step based. But it's
Wow.
funny because it gave me this in 5 seconds. Scary. It's kind of scary, but one of them says, "How do you stay grounded or mentally strong on tough days?"
You know that that is a great question, and you know it's how I set up the day, and I set up today based on how I ended yesterday. So so yesterday at the end of my day, I did my 10th step. I was ready to do an 11th step when I woke up, and I've already messaged 5 6 people today, and I did step 12. So then in the 12 and 12 of Alcoholics Anonymous, and these are just things that I follow, I can do a spot check inventory. So I believe that in HALT, have you heard of HALT before? Hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. In the course of my day, I could be one or all of these things. So I take my own inventory, because if I don't take my inventory, you take my inventory, and you can't do anything about it, but I can. So when I'm irritable, when I'm honking at somebody on the road, or impatient with the food server at a restaurant, or impatient with my wife, or impatient with me, it's what's going on. Do you need to eat? I found at 71 years old, I need a little bit more rest, you know, and I need to find the source of my loneliness, you know, and why am I angry? So I use HALT to this day as a great indicator, and I make that course correction, and then I'm back. And sometimes it doesn't happen. I feel, God, I love this question. Um, for me to get a good night's sleep, I have to be rested first. Otherwise, I had sleep apnea when I was morbidly obese. And sleep apnea, you can get a lot of sleep, but you don't get any rest. And so I find that clearing my mind, clearing my spirit, clearing my body, clearing all the blockage that helps me rest prior to sleep allows me to wake up the next day ready to go. And then I can better adjust my day according to any challenge that might come up. But I take my inventory on a regular basis, and am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired?
It's funny because I remember hearing that. I remember being in drug court. I think the first person I've heard it in the rooms of recovery, but I remember the first time I heard that was it was a therapist that we had to work with for years while I was in this in the drug court program. And I remember her telling me about that. And so then I was mentally kind of cognizant of it, and I was at least thinking about it. And it was interesting. I can't tell you how many times I've been super hungry, and it's like I have the Chuck C glasses on or
Oh,
whatever.
yeah.
It's like, it's amazing how much of a difference it makes. How pissed off all of a sudden this job I normally like is really pissing me off, and people are pissing me off. It's like, and then I eat, I'm like, oh, okay. It's not like that. It's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's good stuff, man. It really
It,
is. It's good to live by.
it really is. And it's not as much as, and you bring up hunger, and I'm that way a long time, and it leads to anger and unknown emotions. Um, it's not that we eat. A lot of it is what we eat, and I don't want to get in, this is not a nutritional show, but I used to weigh almost 400 pounds. I weigh 209 pounds today. I've kept the weight off for a long time, 15, 16 years. And I found that when I eat right, not just what I eat, but when I eat correctly, I have a tendency to feel better, less bloated, less tired, all the things, because I'm putting good nutrients in my body. And it's the same way with the spiritual nature. When I'm putting in God and you, I'm a lot better than when I just put me in, right? Because there's a hole in me, just like when I'm hungry, there's a hole in me that needs to be filled with food. But the same thing, if I don't fill it with the right food, I'm going to be hungry an hour later. I'm going to be on the couch. You know, um, a person who eats bonbons compared to a person who eats fresh salad. They're both eating, but what they're eating is not good for them.
How did you start that at, you said around 16 years ago? How did
Yeah,
you make that decision?
you know, my food disorder came back because I was, 20, I don't know, 22 years sober, and I got into some bad habits, and so I started to lose. I actually at about 2008, I started to gain weight again, and I got to about 395 pounds. And there was a physician, Dr. Cron. He was a bariatric surgeon in San Bernardino when I lived in Southern California. And I went to him and I said, "Hey, I tried all this weight. I tried to uh, lose weight, and I could lose 20 pounds, but I gained 40. It was just spiraling out of control." And I used to go to Overeaters Anonymous in the early days. And he said, "You've got a food disorder, and if you don't do something about it, it's going to kill you." So I went and I had surgery. I had gastric bypass surgery. He said to me, he said, "I can't make you thin for the rest of your life, but I can give you an even start." And that's all AA did. They told me, "We can't stop drinking for you, but if you want to stop drinking, we can show you how to do it." And Dr. Cron took me and he gave me an even slate, and I've learned how to live that way. So I know what I'm talking about when it comes to eating right. Um, I'm not an expert, but 15 years, I've still, I've kept off 170 pounds, 180 pounds, and I'm in great shape. I'm 71 years old. I've mown my lawn today, edging my lawn, in 107-degree weather with humidity here in Florida, and I feel fantastic. And I encourage everyone to, because alignment, Drew, you know that you would never drive down the road with three tires out of alignment and one tire in alignment. If it's inclement weather, you're not going to stay on the road. If you have to brake too hard, you're going to go off the road. You're going to have trouble, or you're going to have a blowout when you least expect it at 11 o'clock at night, and there's no lights on and you don't have a spare, and you can hardly find your jack, and you're on the side of the road. That's not dangerous. So we equip ourselves uh, adequately, and I often said we have to be in alignment in our recovered life. The emotional, the spiritual, the mental, and the physical have to be in alignment continually for us to stay on the road of recovery.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And thank you for sharing that, Robert, because I'm sure there's a ton of people that can relate to that. I mean, even me myself, I notice, and I've talked about this before, but it's interesting how food can be so kind of similar to alcohol or drugs, in that it can give you comfort when you're
Yeah,
feeling down or when you're
yeah,
feeling bored. It's
yeah.
kind of it's definitely lifts you up. I've noticed at times where sometimes I'm bored or I just had a bad day or whatever, and I'm just kind of eating whatever. So I think that's cool stuff, Robert. Thank you for sharing that.
You're
Let me
welcome.
see. There's a lot of stuff on here that's kind of interesting. It says, did you face any doubts or fear about life without substances or alcohol? How did you push through?
Meetings, meetings, meetings. If it wasn't for meetings, Drew, I'd be lost. I just, I, there was a group of people in Las Vegas who really loved me. I mean, loved me. in ways that I'd never received before. Now, there were people who loved me in my addictive life. You know, I would never say my wives didn't love me, my parents didn't love me, but I never received it before. So, so getting me through times of doubt and can I do this? I would just go sit in a meeting, and people I really liked and really admired were giving me a glimpse that if I did what they did, I could have what they have. Now, I can't have the time, you know, Eddie or Buddy or Steve or Will or Jack or Texas Mike or any of Pete the Great. I couldn't have their time, but I could have their peace. And being around them sometimes, you know what it's like, Drew. It's sort of you. It's almost like a transfusion. I go into a meeting thinking my day is just terrible. I leave a meeting think I've got it made. I'm overpaid. I can't believe I lived this freaking life. And all it was an hour with the right people. So if you're new or relatively new, go to meetings, hook up with people who really have reinvented themselves in a way that is miraculous, and you want a piece of that miracle.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's something about there's two things in life. Well, three things that I always that many times I didn't feel like doing, but every time I did, I felt better. One of them was church for some reason. I'd walk out and I just always felt better. Another one was the gym. Anytime I walked out, I always just felt a little bit lighter and just better and more at peace. And the other one was meetings, and not in any specific order,
Yeah.
but it was the same thing. I remember being, and kind of to add to this question, tons of doubts, tons of fear
Yeah.
about living sober. So many fears about living sober that I just continued to use and be miserable for a long time. And a lot of it was I couldn't get honest, like you talked about as well. But they saved me in the beginning. Being around people that understood what I was going through in those early days was so key. And I remember being all flustered and emotionally on the roller coaster and all over the place. I didn't know what life was going to look like, and I was future tripping, and I was stuck in the past. And it was the same thing for me. I'd go in somewhere for an hour, hour and a half, and as I walked in that door, I'm thinking, man, my life is a mess. And walking out of there, I remember thinking, I think I might be able to do this. And I just felt just a little bit more positive, which was the shift that I needed in those days, just to make it one more day.
Yeah. You know, and just to add to that, because I remember hitting the wall at 6 months, and I knew, Drew, something was missing in my sober life, and I didn't know what it was, but I had this impending doom, almost like I was a brand new guy. Once again, I was 6 months, I was still relatively new, but almost like I was a newcomer walking through the room. So I had that fear starting to rise up. So I went to my sponsor, Jack Fisher, at the time. He's passed away a number of years now. But I went and talked to Jack. I said, Jack, what is missing? Because I'm afraid if I don't get my head around it, I'm going to go back out, and Jack, I'm never going to come back. I knew I didn't want to leave, but I knew if I did, I was done. I was never coming. My pride wouldn't let me, Drew. And Jack said, service. The one thing I see, he said, I'm not talking about cleaning ashtrays. I'm not talking about making coffee. I'm talking about going on a 12-step call. That's what we call them in Vegas, and helping the other alcoholic who's desperate. And that night, we went on a 12-step call. We met a guy in a hotel. Las Vegas is the relapse capital of the world. And here was a guy with 20 years sobriety, and we met him in his hotel, and his hotel smelled like a bar that needed to be cleaned. And I realized, and I got into service that day, and I've never left serving. My sponsor Jack told me, he said, I've never met a person actively involved in service who has relapsed. And that's been true in my life. It's been true in my sponsor's life. It's been true of everyone I've ever known, you included, when we serve others. So fellowshipping and serving is I think is the main ingredients to any good cake, any good recipe.
Yeah, that I could totally relate to that 6 month mark for me. For
Yeah.
me, it was and I've talked about this before, but it was I'll just say, I normally say 6 to 9 months. I'll say 10 because my last relapse was at 10. Same kind of thing. The kind of, I was happy to be sober, but the newness or the shininess of it kind of wore off.
Yeah.
And I was at that and I see a lot of people at this point. I see a lot of people where you see them the first few months and they're just so psyched up and just ready to go. And then they kind of hit that block. But I find that if you could just if you could figure out what you need, and like you mentioned, the service to make it past that block, then I see people just take off after that point.
I'll tell you, you bring up something. It's very, it's very true. But in 12-step recovery now, I want to feel better about me. The 12 steps of recovery have nothing to do with me. The only reason they concern me is so I can be more to someone else. I'm not, I'm only a better person because I've chosen sobriety. I've chosen the path of recovery. I'm not a better person because I'm a good guy. I'm a liar. I'm a cheat. I'll steal from you. I'll get drunk. I'll take all your drugs. And if you let me, I'll take your woman. You know, that's who I am. So none of this is about me being a good guy. If I want to feel better about me, I come and help you. And I look and I say, wow, I made a difference in Drew's life. I must have value. So others, I did a podcast one time called Solving for God, Others, and Myself. And if I'm going to be first, I have to be willing to be third. So this notion of I want to feel good, there's no I in the 12 steps of recovery. It's all we. It's all us. It's not me. The sooner I drop the me, the better off we are.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to ask you real quick. I know we're getting kind of towards the end here. What were those 12-step calls like in Vegas?
Some were pretty disastrous because you see people at their worst and they think they know everything. So I would be on 12-step calls in hotels, people who had relapsed after a long period of time. Um, at the same time, I was on an H&I panel, hospitals and institutions in Las Vegas, going into treatment centers or at the end of meetings in different associations. But they were varied. Every time, though, I I left with the feeling of gratitude that I've never felt before. I was never grateful. You know, I know we're running close to time. There was a friend of mine named Russian Ted, and I remember going into the turning point in Las Vegas, and I remember going to Russian Ted, and he said, "How's your day?" Oh boy, did he open up Pandora's box of woe is me, right?
You really want to know?
Oh yeah, you really want to know? I'm going to open up a case of pour me on you. I started telling Ted how crappy the day was. Fortunately, Ted was sober a long time, probably 20 years at the time. And I got to the end of my tirade, and he said, "But are you grateful?" And I thought, old man, you didn't hear a freaking word I said, because there's nothing about what I just told you you would assume I'm grateful. And he said, to whatever degree you're grateful for today will determine the quality and the quantity of your sobriety tomorrow. I'll repeat that. Whatever level of gratitude you're feeling today will determine your quality and the quantity of your sobriety tomorrow. And I learned, Drew, every time you and I have gone into prisons or institutions, we don't always feel good. But man, when we're leaving and they lock the door behind us, no matter how my day is gone, as long as you lock the door behind me, I'm having a good freaking day. And so sometimes we have to just grab whatever is positive, even in a negative, what appeared to be a negative situation, we give it enough time. And even if, especially for a newcomer, even if the only victory, which is the greatest victory we have, is we didn't drink, we didn't use, we didn't blow our life up, we didn't burn it to the ground one more time, we have victory.
Yeah, it's and sometimes it's I used to forget that sometimes where I'd be trying to get all this stuff done for the day and I'm trying to do big things today and I go, "Oh man, I didn't accomplish enough." And then here comes along the thoughts of gratitude, which saves me, I think
Yeah.
sometimes and just realizing that our new life today, because we are in recovery and everything, it's just making it through the day sober
Yeah.
sometimes is going to be your biggest win. And it's easy to forget about that sometimes, but I feel like when I'm trying to think of things to be grateful for, it just makes all the difference. It's
It,
seriously, it's crazy how much of a difference it makes.
and gratitude is everything. And again, I'm so grateful to Ted. God rest his sober soul. He's passed away a number of years now. But I'm so grateful he confronted me. And I believe, we talk about miracles, I believe that we had a God appointment because he taught me a lesson on gratitude that, I don't know, 39 years later, I still remember. And I still foundationally hold that as truth that turned me from me to understanding what God was doing. I still hadn't found a job. I still had the police looking for me. I still had a wife. I wasn't divorced from my second wife at that time. My life was upside down. But at the end of my day, I was in a room with sober people ready to go into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if that's one more day, one more opportunity where I made it through the day. And if that's not enough to be grateful for, then I'm reading from the wrong script.
Yeah. And that's why too, it's I just taking it day by day. My life got so much better when I started focusing on that. So much better. It seemed like such a simple thing, but when I started actually implementing it, because I was someone who was always stuck in the future, always scared of the future, or just in shame, guilt, regret of the past. And when I started taking things just day by day, it's like, you know what? I can stay sober today. Because before I was always, oh, I'm going to stay sober for 15 years, 20 years. I'd be thinking way far ahead. And it just never worked out that way. So, Robert, I got one more question for you. Or go ahead.
Go ahead. Fire away.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, when people are in recovery for a long time, kind of like you talked about with the 12-step call, and they go out after a bunch of years, it seems a lot of times from what I've seen, a very small chance that they end up making it back. And I was going to ask you, what do you think that is? Do you think is it shame or pride? Do you think having to walk back in? What do you think that is?
I think from a psychological standpoint that occurs. There's nothing worse than a person like me, 39 and a half years sober, having to raise your hand as a newcomer. I think Father Martin talks about alcohol. I'm an alcoholic. I did other things along the way, but I'm a real alcoholic. Um, he talks about, and it can be true for meth addict or crystal or what have you. He talks about the disease progressing whether we're drinking or not. So if I were to go back out, I would, in a relatively short time, pick up where I would have been had I never stopped, which is scary compared to how I drank, but how I would be drinking. That's why people who relapse with 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, why we go down as quickly as we did, because it's a physiological need. Our body is trying to make up for, and I've noticed this in weight as well. I would lose weight eating the ketos and the protein whey, and then I'd go back to some carbohydrates, and within a relatively short period of time, I'm bigger than I was before, and that happened before. And the same way with alcohol. Remember how we'd be plain, we'd be sober for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and we went back and hit it. Man, we hit it hard. It was almost like we were trying to make up for lost time. And I
Yeah.
think the body remembers where we would have been. The body is keeping track. It says in the big book, there will come a time when you have no mental defense against that first drink. That defense must come from a power greater than yourself. So I think it's a psychological, ego driven thing where I don't want to come back and, people look at me. I'm 30 years, I'm 20 years, I'm 10 years sober, and now I'm raising my hand as a newcomer, getting a 24-hour chip. So I think that psychologically keeps us on the rims, but more so that, again, I was sober 71 days. And within that relatively short window, Drew, I was worse off than I ever was before. That wasn't because of a social stigma. That was because of a physical craving where my body was trying to make up for what I deprived it for 71 days.
Yeah, that is it's so interesting, and it's something that I've lived it.
Yeah.
It was this, and it's a scary, I'm glad it happened now, because that was the extra kind of push I needed to really start taking things seriously.
Yeah.
But it's a scary thing, and when you're experiencing it, when all those things that people used to tell you or warn you about what would happen if you started drinking again, when you start to experience it and you realize they were all right, it's a scary thing, man, so.
Yeah, it is to realize that no human power could have relieved our alcoholism, but God could and would if he were sought.
Yeah, and understanding that too, for me, I actually started to feel relief when I realized that, because I realized, oh, I'm not just a terrible person. My efforts were,
Yeah.
I realize now why everything wasn't working. It makes sense. I realized why I was doing the things I was doing, failing the way I was failing, making the same decisions over and over again, hitting my head on the wall 1,000 times. I started to understand it after that, so. Robert, man, I just want to say I appreciate you every time you come on here. I love it. So much knowledge, inspiration, wisdom, experience, all amazing stuff. So I just want to say thank you, Robert. Anyone trying to connect with Robert, @recovery_guy for Instagram. I'll put all his stuff.
I changed that. It's now Recovery Guy 1986.
Recovery Guy 1986, and I'll put all of his socials in the details. So,
And one thing, Drew, in closing, let me just add, you brought up something very interesting because you said the word sick. We're not bad people trying to get better. We're sick people trying to get well. Now, it doesn't mean we didn't do bad things, but we didn't do bad things because we're bad. We've always been wonderful. We're just very sick.
very sick. Yeah.
Sick. And when we recover from that sickness, we're you. I mean, you're trusted around kids, for crying out loud. Who would
Can
have
you
thought?
believe it?
And I'm trusted around somebody else's wife. Can you believe that? It's crazy. Yeah, and we're admired in our community. My dad told me, gosh, there's stories after stories. He said at 9 months sober, he said, your mother and I used to worry about you, but we don't worry anymore. That was the greatest thing my father would ever say to me. We don't worry about you anymore. When 9 months previous, he dropped me off in a motel and said, your mother and I aren't going to watch you die.
Isn't that nuts? I mean, you can't hear anything better from someone in your life than
Yeah.
than that, when it's someone who's tried to help you so much and was so hurt by everything, and then you hear that and you realize, oh man, there's a reason we're on this path today.
Yeah. And you're right. We could talk forever.
Oh, we could go. Hey, we're gonna have to do a 5-hour episode, guys. You ready? Me and Robert could do it, but we're good.
We have a marathon.
Yeah. Hey, Robert, I appreciate you, man. You rock. You are the best. You're a great friend. Thanks for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. Thanks, Drew.